So you've befriended people that are maybe a little bit unusual for you to be friends with, which is over time you've made friends with people that are in the KKK,
Yeah, the Ku Klux Klan.
and you've had them leave the KKK as a result of your friendship.
That is correct.
This is another episode of the Automate and Grow podcast. I will say it's not an ordinary episode because my guest today is Daryl Davis. And my first introduction to Daryl was as a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast. And then we met through John Levy's Influencer Salon. So first off, Daryl, thanks so much. I really appreciate you doing the podcast.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you are, I will say, a world-class musician, and you've traveled around and you've performed with a bunch of really kind of well-known people, right?
I've tried.
So who are some of the people you've performed with? And
A lot of blues artists, some country artists, a lot of the original rock and roll pioneers. Worked with Chuck Berry for a number of years. Played with Bo Diddley, the Coasters, the Platters, the Drifters, the legendary blues band, which was formerly Muddy Waters band. Yeah. And, people like that. Sam Moore from Sam and Dave, Percy Sledge, different people.
So that profession, you would normally have, hey, this is a really special guy and an amazing life, and you're a pianist by trade, right?
Correct.
But as a result of that, I think maybe what you've become, maybe in my opinion, more impactful for even, is this, how do I put it? So you've befriended people that are maybe a little bit unusual for you to be friends with, which is over time you've made friends with people that are in the KKK.
Yeah, the Ku Klux Klan.
And you've had them leave the KKK as a result of your friendship.
That is correct.
So
it's not so unusual. I mean, yes, it is unusual in the sense, you're thinking of two extremes and opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right.
A racist, a vehement racist, someone who would go so far to take their racism and join an organization that practices racism, and then me being a black guy and becoming friends. Well, racism is irrational to begin with. And so it's a learned behavior. So if it can be learned, it can be unlearned. And at the core, we all have commonalities, and we all have some degree of good in us, unless, we're a sociopath or something like that. So I tap into their humanity, and that's what comes out. And that's what I make friends with. And then that is reciprocated. And then all the extemporaneous stuff like the color of my skin, or whether I go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or a temple, matter less and less.
So how many people would you say have made this change in perspective as a result of your friendship over time?
I know for a fact over 200.
Which is kind of crazy, right? So I don't know. I want to kind of turn it a little bit over to you. Like, I want to have a conversation with you, but I think that the story of how this starts is really kind of phenomenal. And I think it's important for people to understand. I love your statement, which is, hey, look, I appealed to their humanity, first of all. And you're able to talk to the person and get by this other part, right? But how did that all start?
Well, as a child, I spent a lot of time overseas because my father was in the U.S. Foreign Service. So I grew up as an American embassy brat. And so my mom and my dad and I lived in various countries around the world. And I was exposed at an early age to many, many different cultures, colors, ethnicities, religions, practices, traditions, etc. And so, as a young kid taking all this in, it shaped my personality during my formative years of my life. Perhaps had I not had this experience, I may not be doing this kind of work today. But that prepared me for it at a very early age, before most kids here in the U.S. Would come to know people of different races, And I use that word loosely because there's only one race,
Right.
human race. Race is a man-made construct, but we use it loosely. Uh, before my peers here would come to know diversity, so to speak, I was already prepared for it. I had not had the racial experiences that kids had at my age because I grew up overseas where there was not that kind of thing going on, at least
Right.
not black and white. you know. And so when I would come back here and experience it in my own country, that's what I was not prepared for.
Interesting.
So it was the kind of reverse.
Right.
And here's the thing: most Americans don't travel. You know, a lot of us don't have passports to go
Right.
anywhere, and if we go somewhere, it's to the beach.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So at an early age, I was seeing things all over the world. Um, and I'd come back here to the US and I would be in geography class or world history class or whatever. And we would be studying the pyramids, the Sphinx, the Berlin Wall, the Eiffel Tower, the Mona Lisa, and all those kinds of things. And I've been to each one of those things.
Wow, that's
I've
makes
been in,
so much.
yeah, I've been inside the pyramids. I saw King Tut in his coffin in Egypt, in
Oh, wow.
Cairo,
That's awesome.
long before it ever went on tour and all the different museums around the world. I saw it in place. Um, and while I was doing that as a child, and I remember all that stuff. While I was doing that as a child, to me it was just the norm because I was a kid. I didn't know any different,
Sure.
and I thought most kids do this. Now, most kids in my circle overseas did do that
Right.
because their parents also were diplomats, whether they were my fellow Americans or my little friends from the French embassy or Japanese embassy or whatever. The whole diplomatic corps. That's what they did.
That's amazing.
So yeah, so you figure everybody does what you do, and so you just take it for granted. I appreciated it, but I took it for granted. I appreciated it even more when I would come back home and we would be in class studying these things, and I realized that nobody in my classroom had done these things that I had done. And chances are the closest they would ever get to the pyramids or the Mona Lisa or whatever were the pictures inside the textbook.
Wow.
And that really made me appreciate what my parents, had exposed me to. And so therefore, I was able to accept a lot of differences from other countries and traditions and practices because I didn't live in this little bubble or in a state of xenophobia or whatever.
Right. Well, and I think that's a good point. I mean, first of all, what a phenomenal thing for a kid to be exposed to so many things that you would normally have to wait till you're older to see.
Right.
So that gives you to your point, like that kind of worldview. And I think I always argue that over here in North America, we're kind of new.
Yeah, we are. We
Yeah.
are essentially.
So I think that's it's interesting that it all starts with that kernel of you being exposed to an area where, second of all, it's a tight geographic area and there's so many cultures in one area, which is like Europe or other parts of, I mean, you were in Egypt, so you're parts of Africa, right? Like you're
Right.
all over. So it's interesting difference. Whereas to your point, our culture here in North America is really shaped by a certain point in time.
Yes.
It's like hundreds of years as opposed to thousands, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And but here's the thing also, Mike. Like I said, most Americans don't travel. And even within our own country, and I can even narrow it down, even within our own state, some people who live in a state, they've never been to another state unless they live on the border. So if they live on the border between New York and New Jersey, yeah, they'll cross back and forth or something like that.
Right.
Or if they live on the border of Virginia and North Carolina, they might go back and forth. But if they're like in the center of the state, they rarely go to not everybody, but a lot of people rarely go to other states, especially those who come from small towns.
That makes sense.
And they don't even go to the bigger town. I know people in Virginia um, who live in some rural towns, and they've never even been to Richmond, their
Wow.
state capital. You know, I live 15 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. And I know people who live 15 and 20 minutes north of me. D.C. is just south of me, 15 minutes. I know people who live 15, 20 minutes north of me, all right, who have never been down to the Washington Monument.
Oh, wow. That's weird, right? When you think about
Yeah, it's weird to me. But
Yeah.
they figure they got everything where they live. The mall is right there, the school's right there, the store is right there.
So we get in
So
our own little bubble. And I even see that in LA, right? Like you have like,
mhm,
you get in the bubble. They call it the bubble when you're at the beach. And then you don't,
right.
no, we got everything here.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But I like what you're pointing out, which is that it's really tough to understand other perspectives and cultures if you're not exposed to them.
And then when your exposure comes from the media,
Mm,
from TV, from the movies, you know, that shapes how you view others. So not so much today, but back in the day, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 62 years old.
I'm 46.
Okay, 46. So we got about um, not quite 20 years.
Yeah,
But
16 years or whatever.
okay, so do you remember TV shows like what is it? Andy Griffith show?
Sure. Yeah, I would see it in mostly black and white, but I would watch it as a
Right.
kid. So,
Okay, Andy Griffith, Leave It to Beaver.
oh yeah, I was a big Leave It to Beaver,
Okay.
which is probably
Law.
hilarious for people watching this. But
Yeah, that's okay. They'll learn. We'll teach them. Lost in Space. Do you remember that
oh,
show?
of course, yeah, totally love Lost in
Okay. So these, Superman, Batman, all this, these are the shows that I grew up with as a kid. You probably saw them in reruns perhaps,
rerun.
but
Yeah.
you know them, okay? But this is what I grew up with, when they were actually being done, you know what I mean? Not in syndicate, in repeat, a
Yep.
rerun. Okay. So little Opie Taylor on the Andy Mayberry show, he never had any black friends.
That's true.
Little Beaver Cleaver didn't have any black friends.
Totally.
Neither did Wally or Eddie Haskell. And by the way, Eddie Haskell just died a
Oh
couple weeks
no,
ago.
I
Yeah,
didn't
he
know
just
that.
passed away.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
And how about little Eddie Munster? He didn't have any black friends. And
Well,
none of those kids in the Adams family had any black friends.
I remember though there was a really famous, not to divert, but a really famous episode where the father talked about racism, right?
Which show? I
And the
mean,
Munsters.
yeah, but it wasn't black and white so much. It was because Herman Munster looked so weird.
Right. Yeah.
So
He was almost like he was taking the perspective of the worldview. Anyway,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
I do
exactly.
remember that.
Yeah. So, and then you had Space Family Robinson, Penny and little Will Robinson
Yep.
and
Robot.
Judy and the robot, right?
And what was
And the
the doctor's name? I can't
yeah,
remember.
Dr. Smith.
Smith. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they traveled all over the universe trying
Hmm.
to get back to Earth, right? They saw people with 3 arms, saw people with 4 eyes, saw green people, purple people. They saw everything but a black person. There were
Yeah.
no black people in the whole universe.
Crazy when
So,
you think about it.
well, not so much for white people
Maybe.
because that's what they're accustomed to, right? But I never saw anybody who looked like me.
Amazing. That's crazy when you think.
So I had to identify with these little white kids or white families on TV, right? And uh, the first black and white, not black and white TV show, but black and white pairing, where a black person was on equal footing with a white person on TV, was I Spy.
I Spy.
You had,
Okay.
you had Bill Cosby and Robert Culp.
Oh my goodness, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, the first interracial kiss on TV was Star Trek between Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura.
Right. Oh my God.
Gene Roddenberry was way ahead of his time,
Way ahead. Like
way ahead. And and then we didn't have any black heroes on TV. All the heroes, Aquaman, Superman, Batman, all these people, Wonder Woman, were all white people.
hmm
So all my heroes were white. And I remember also in fourth grade that I liked Thor, with the hammer and light, and the god of lightning, the thunder, or whatever.
Yep.
And so Halloween, I want to be Thor. And so my mom bought me a Thor costume at the Five and Dime store or whatever. And I remember putting it on. I'm all excited, had my little plastic hammer, and I look like Thor. I thought I did. and until some of my friends told me I couldn't be Thor because Thor was white.
Oh man. Okay.
It crushed me.
Yeah, I can
Crushed
imagine.
me. There were no black costumes
Right.
for black people. If we dressed up as somebody, it had to be a white person. All the masks were white people.
Interesting.
So what does that do to you when you don't have anything that you can identify with, and you have to assume not only anytime you put on a costume, you're assuming somebody else's identity. Obviously, you dress up as Cinderella, dress up as Superman or whatever. That's not you.
Right.
But when you're assuming somebody else's identity, and now you have to assume somebody else's color too.
Right, which is really strange because to your point, like how do you relate to that? You always feel like you're separate and different.
Precisely. And that's what breaks down most people.
Mm.
It didn't really break me down. It just made me more curious, because that's just my nature. But that's what happens when you are forcing somebody to identify with something that they're not, or that they're not good enough to identify with what you are. See, it works both ways.
Totally.
So let me give you an example. I remember this too. Back in the day when I was a kid, Miss America, the contest, beauty contest, did not allow black women to compete.
Wow, that's crazy when you think about it. And that was like up
That
until
was
the 80s?
No, this was back in the 60s.
60s.
Yeah. And then I think it changed like in maybe the early 70s or something. But no, it didn't change. It was still there in the early 70s. But they did not allow black women to compete. Black women were not deemed beautiful enough
Wow.
to be Miss America. And at that time, there were only two categories for women. Women were objectified. All they had was the swimsuit and the evening gown. That was it. You walk across the stage in your bathing suit, and then you walk across the stage in your evening gown. And all the judges were white males. So women were not, they weren't considered talented or anything like that, or intelligent. You don't have to write an essay or tell what your future aspirations are or anything like that. Just show your bodies in a bathing suit and an evening gown. And this panel of white men will look at you and judge your beauty and score you, and one of you will become Miss America. All right? So being told that you're ugly, that you're not good enough to compete in Miss America, what does that do for black women's self-esteem? It lowers it, right? So how did we elevate their esteem? We created the Miss Black America beauty pageant in order to give young black girls something to which to aspire, right? And that worked. That worked. We had Miss Black Americas all over the place every year. Finally, Miss America opened its doors to include any American female, regardless of race or ethnicity. As long as they were American, they could enter the contest. And since that time, we've had several Miss Americas who've been black, starting with Vanessa Williams,
I was
right?
going to say, and that was like 1983. I was
something like that.
Yeah.
And Vanessa Williams and Debbie Turner.
Oh yeah.
And I think maybe one or two more. So now that Miss America has come to its senses and opened its doors to include anybody, Asian American, Latino American, whatever, we no longer need Miss Black America. It served its purpose. You can get rid of it now. That's what we need to do. So in TV land back then, we didn't have any shows that depicted black people in a equal role to the white people. We were somebody's butler, somebody's chauffeur, a drug dealer, a prostitute, a pimp, a criminal, you know, the gardener or whatever. But we were never in lead roles until that I Spy thing. So
Right.
this is all what I'm seeing on TV, what I'm growing up with. In fact, when we finally got somebody who was like a hero to us, they found they didn't find any good looking black guy. They found so they could have got me
Where are we
right
going?
now.
Who was the guy? Wait, I'm confused.
All right, they found the ugliest guy they could put on TV.
J.J. Walker?
No,
I'm like, who are you talking about?
uglier than him.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
Sorry, JJ, I love you, but
They found the ugliest guy they could put on TV, and he was a criminal who had been released from jail to play this role. I mean, not jail in real life, but on TV, he'd been given a pass to come do this role that they needed him to do to work with law enforcement.
who is that?
Mr. T.
Oh, it was. I was thinking A-Team in my head, so I was wondering. Wait,
Yeah.
Mr. T's not a handsome guy?
Does he appeal to you?
I like Mr. T. I love Mr. T.
You like his role for his macho, bad attitude. BA was his name or something, right?
Baracus, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
for me growing up, like I was probably like 8, 9, 10 when that show was out. And
But that would not be somebody that little white girls would be attracted to.
absolutely not. And I think even as a kid, for me, it was like, I think you liked him, but he wasn't. He was a little odd, right? It was
exactly.
Character, and he's got some mannerisms that are not like
right
friendly.
So that they wouldn't give a Denzel Washington or a Billy Dee Williams, that role because that would attract white women.
Interesting.
And that's what they want to keep apart.
Because Billy Dee Williams was obviously legendary from Star Wars, but I don't think I was probably too young to know him from before.
Right.
But that's a good point. I mean, Billy Dee Williams being like a super charismatic, awesome like guy you'd want to hang out with, and he could have been Brad Pitt.
yeah, but they would not have given him that role in the 60s.
Interesting.
Steven Spielberg was way ahead of his time too. And I don't know if you saw The Color Purple or not, if you remember that.
Yeah. Oprah Winfrey.
Phenomenal movie, phenomenal actors. And not one of them got an award.
Did they not?
No, not one. And it was a predominantly black cast. And then when they finally began introducing black people on a more or less it's supposed to get to an even scale, it was only light-skinned black people.
Right.
Okay. I remember I don't watch soap operas, but I remember all the hullabaloo like on General Hospital or All My Children or whatever, when one of the characters was going to come home with a black person.
Crazy.
They started dating. They started dating this black guy, this black girl. It was always a light-skinned one, as close to white as you could almost get.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm probably, it's weird because I'm wondering, hearing you talk just about the time frame. I'm born in 73, so I probably was, it sounds like almost at the point where a lot of the shows I watched were like, there's black characters, but there was always that separation a little bit, which is they were coming into a world and they were trying to merge them in a sense. Does that make sense? Like, different strokes and
and the thing of it is TV was behind,
right?
Because there were black and white relationships out here,
totally, yeah,
but they didn't want to show them on TV.
Weird.
They didn't think the people were ready for it, and it's I disagree with them not wanting to show it on TV. And some people were ready for it, others were not. Because if you remember In the Heat of the Night, that TV show,
it was amazing.
When Chief Gillespie had a racist character, it was almost that Archie Bunker character that he played.
Actor, wasn't it?
He was a phenomenal actor.
Yeah, same actor.
He was Archie Bunker.
It was, what's his name? Carol O'Connor.
Carol O'Connor, exactly. Okay, he knew how to play a role. The guy was great.
Yep.
And he played Archie Bunker to a T. He played the stereotypical Southern racist redneck sheriff to a T. All right, and when the black guy Tibbs, I forgot what his first name was, but Detective Tibbs came to Sparta, Mississippi.
I remember what it was. I can't remember his name. I
His
remember
name
the
was
actor, which is Sidney Poitier, was in the movie, right?
Yeah, yeah, but no, I'm not talking about his real name. His real name was
I can't remember.
Harold Rollins. Or
I'll have to look it up, but but I know who you're talking about.
okay, well, anyway, Detective Tibbs. What was his character in the movie? You know, they butted heads for a couple seasons, and gradually, as the seasons
Virgil,
progressed, Virgil Tibbs, right? Um, Gradually, as the seasons progressed, Gillespie became more and more less racist. And
right?
if you remember, it got to the point where he married the black councilwoman.
Oh, did he? I don't remember
Yes,
that.
he did, Della Reese. Yeah,
Delaware?
he
Wow.
yeah he married her on in the show.
Yeah. No,
Do
yeah, I got
you
the character.
Yeah, do you know that he got hate mail and death threats?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. You might get
I
that
mean,
today. It's
the
weird.
man is playing a role.
I know. It's like, how dare you?
I mean, it's crazy.
I'm acting.
But that's how deep
Yeah, that's crazy.
racism goes.
Yeah, it's
That's how deep it goes.
it's not
When
that.
you're going to threaten somebody who's playing a role on TV,
Yeah. Well, it's
that's
irrational to your point, right? And it's like
exactly
you get these to your point. If all you're exposed to is this circle of ideas, and if you're in a geographic area that's traditionally got these ideas, and your parents have these ideas, and your grandparents have these ideas, and the education's not showing you something else, not everybody gets to travel to Egypt and Paris, right, when they're young,
right.
so they don't have that exposure, which is probably it's really that's a good point because TV kind of shapes the way a lot of kids think, and I think on the flip side, like I have a unique perspective maybe because I'm Canadian, and we have like in our constitution it's a multicultural society,
Hmm.
so you're Canadian, but you're whatever you brought, right? So we know Jamaicans versus Trinidadians versus whatever.
Right,
Like, we know everyone's something. This
right.
guy's Italian, this guy's Portuguese, this guy's from Somalia. Like, but here it seems very like. First of all, it's not that long ago.
Right.
Like it's this to your point. Like when this is stuff from the '60s, '70s, '80s. It's not
But
that.
see, unlike unlike Canada, we had a greater degree
Mm,
of slavery. We owned people,
right.
but it was considered owning property
Wow.
because the slave owners did not consider these entities to be people.
Bizarre.
In fact, they were 3/5 of a human being.
Mm,
That's how they were classified. All right, they were property. They were bought and sold on the courthouse steps.
it's
So you
crazy.
had a family, and somebody would bid on the young boy, the son, and buy him and take him off, never to be seen again by the family. Somebody else might bid on the wife, take her off to some other family, some other plantation. The father would go this way, whatever. Some families were bought all together. Some were separated. It's just like, when if you've ever gotten a dog from a litter of dogs, the mother has all these puppies, and you go and you take this doggy's, this mother dog's
That's
children.
it's such a bizarre concept. Like it's so
But
ridiculous.
we don't think about it when we go to get pets.
Right.
We separate them from the mom.
Hmm.
And do we care how the mother dog feels when she's missing a kid? When she's been separated, we don't think about it. That's how they thought about people, human beings.
That's crazy when you think about it.
Well, yeah, but
And it's
now
not that, it's not that long ago either.
it's not that long ago. Okay, slavery ended in 1865, but it never really ended. What it did was it mutated. It mutated because our Civil War was fought over slavery.
Right.
All right, and when it ended and the slaves were freed, freeing the slaves did not make them equal. They were free. They didn't have to wear chains and shackles anymore, but they were not free to go into restaurants. to to do this and do that.
Right.
They had restrictions on them because they were black. So slavery muted into segregation and these Jim Crow laws.
Hmm.
People had to, drink from separate water fountains, use the colored restroom and all that kind of stuff, or be denied service in restaurants. Or if you wanted food, you had to go to the back door and they bring it out to you through the kitchen back door. You couldn't come in the front door. You couldn't sit in the front of the bus. Okay,
And that's up
so
until like the 60s, right?
yeah, the 50s and the 60s, yeah.
Yeah, that's not
And so I mean, but this whole is a mutation from
right.
1865. So
Very
even
slow
even
change,
the
if any, right? Like it just like
exactly.
changed.
So even though slavery was officially ended, it didn't instill equality and equity. All right. So now today, yes, we can sit in the front of the bus. I can drink from the same water fountain you can. I don't have to go to the back door anymore or whatever. But the segregation, which is desegregated now, so to speak, has mutated
Hmm.
into systemic racism. And that's what we're seeing. That's what these protests that you are seeing is about.
Which makes
That's
total sense. They should fight.
pardon me.
I mean, I know there's one event that everybody's focusing on, and it's not really one event, is what you're saying. This is
Well,
like
I mean,
this gotta end. And we are
white most white people, black people are not focusing on George Floyd.
right,
Most white people are.
right.
Okay, because they think this is an anomaly.
Mhm.
It happened in a bubble. Um, Not to take anything away from George Floyd's life or his family, thing like that. But what you're seeing in the streets is not all about George Floyd. It's about 400 years of George Floyd's. That's what we're seeing in the streets. And fortunately, for the first time in the history of this country, white people have been with us in our civil rights from day one, from even back to Rosa Parks in 1955 with the bus boycott, through Martin Luther King and his March on Washington and his other marches and protests. White people have joined in, because they recognize what's going on and they want to do right. But never before until now have we seen that many white people who get it and say this is wrong. This we cannot have this. They recognize the problem. They're empathetic, and they come out and they march. Most of these are young people. Some older people, but most of them are young people. They watched a murder right before, not even a murder. It was a lynching.
Oh, it was
A lynching.
ridiculous.
And the reason I call it a lynching is, have you ever seen pictures from the 1920s or whatever of black men hanging from
Sure.
trees,
Like
and,
there's yep, the hanging
and
tree,
a
I was gonna say.
yeah, and a whole group of white people standing around, looking into the camera, smiling and pointing at the people? Those pictures were turned into postcards back then.
Really?
Yes, yes,
Hmm.
yeah. Look up, just Google
Yeah,
lynching
I'll have to check
postcards or
that out.
whatever.
Not that I wanna
Sure.
see them, but I totally believe what you're saying.
Yeah. And I mean, families, young girls, young boys with adults, looking and smiling at the bodies hanging from the trees because they were not human beings. All right. So, and they had no qualms about posing for a picture, all their faces exposed, and mailing the postcard to their family and friends in some other state, saying, this is how we handle our nigger problem and
True.
things like that. So now, when you see a group of white people standing around a black man hanging from a tree and smiling, that is a lynch mob. The black men have been in jail. They've been arrested. They've been arrested for my crazy phone just
No
turned
worries.
it off. But they've
They
been arrested for whatever they've been charged with,
mhm.
whether they're innocent or guilty. Sometimes they're innocent, but they get arrested. Whatever. Either way, before they go to court, the lynch mob goes to the jail and snatches the person out and takes them to a tree and strings them up. Oftentimes, the law enforcement at the jail is in on it. they leave the cell unlocked or the door unlocked, so the lynch mob can get in without breaking down the front door of the jail. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So those pictures, that's a lynch mob. So when you see those pictures, that is a lynch mob.
Hmm.
A couple weeks ago, when you saw what was happening to George Floyd, you were watching a lynch mob. You had 4 police officers in uniform, one with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, 2 sitting on the back portion of his body, holding his legs and back down, and the 4th one standing there, preventing the passersby on the sidewalk from getting too close. And the young lady was filming this, and they didn't care. Derek Chauvin, who was lynching, well, they all were lynching, but who was doing the murder, was looking into the camera the whole time. He wasn't looking at Mr. Floyd's face. He was looking into that cell phone camera, just like the people that you see in those 1920s photos of the hanging. Those 4 police officers committed a lynching.
And on
You know,
video of all things, like
right? It's their job.
like
If they think this man had done something wrong, fine, charge him, arrest him. He
right,
wasn't resisting arrest. Take him to jail. It's the job of the court to prosecute him
for
and
sure.
find him guilty, not your job. And they killed him on camera while looking at it with no shame whatsoever.
So
That was a 21st century 2020 lynching, not 1921, not 1865 or anything like that.
I think that it's almost like, how do you put it? It's extreme carelessness to not humanize the guy and understand that him telling you he can't breathe and he's suffering and his whole body's going into shock because he's probably having a heart attack because you're cutting off the guy's supply. Like, to not respond to that is like,
For you or I,
it's ridiculous. Like,
for you or I to
there's
do
no rationality behind it. I mean,
well, for you or I to do that to another human being would be carelessness, because I think you and I are a lot more compassionate
right,
than that. And if we were doing it, it would be because we were doing it inadvertently. We didn't realize what was happening till
right,
somebody points it out, and we would listen to what that person is saying and say, "Oh, okay, you fix this, whatever." But what they did was not carelessness at all. It was intentional.
mhm,
And you notice, I mean, the guy kept saying, "I can't breathe, can't breathe," and then he even called his mama. He even called for his mama, and he said, "I can't breathe, sir." He's trying to show
respect so he can
so he can get up.
a
Okay,
break, right?
now think about this: you got some over 200-pound man sitting on your back, so he's compressing your lungs.
Hmm.
So already, whatever air can come in there is reduced because your lungs can't expand, right? You got somebody else pushing your throat against the concrete with his knee on your neck, so your throat is constricted, your lungs are constricted. Other guys sitting on the legs, and the other dude standing on the sidewalk. So no, of course he couldn't breathe,
Right.
and he kept talking and talking, and then this man, Derek Chauvin, if you can call him a man, I don't know what he is. If you can call him a man, he has his knee on George Floyd's neck, and as long as George Floyd is talking, he can feel the vibrations in his knee, and when he's trying to get some air in his throat, Derek Chauvin can feel the neck move. He didn't get up off the man's neck until he could no longer move. That's when he stood up. So I question this. Well, first, what did they do? They fired him. And then, to add insult to injury, they called it third-degree murder. What is third-degree murder? No one's ever heard of third-degree murder.
I think it's
I
like
mean, it exists, but
yeah,
it's never used. I mean, like for example, on some books in different states, it's illegal to spit on the sidewalk.
Mm,
But who enforces that?
right.
And in the state of Maryland, I think it may be off the books now, but it went off the books, within the last 30 or 40 years or something. If unless it's still on there, you could not drive around in your car unless the girl was your daughter with any female under the age of 16 who had her shoes off.
What?
Yeah, because crazy laws.
But to your point, there's stuff on
Bec-
the books that's not enforced.
yeah, because that was statutory rape.
Hmm.
Okay,
Wow.
those are archaic laws,
And
and
there's
sometimes archaic laws are still on the books, but they're never enforced. For example, adultery is against the law, but who goes out and enforces that? All
right.
right. So anyway, um, my point is, this man was waiting until there was no more motion, that he could feel the vibration in his knee. He just sat there until he knew the man was dead. So he got a third-degree murder charge. That was insult to injury. All
Totally.
right, and so then, in order for it to be first degree, it would have to have been premeditated.
Right.
Like wherever he was before he arrived there. Let's say he was talking to somebody in the donut shop or something, and the call came over his radio that there was an issue at some store with somebody trying to forge something or pass a fake counterfeit $20 bill, and he says to
Oh,
whoever
that's what he was called for, you're saying.
yeah, well, that's what he was called for. I think it was um, allegedly this George Floyd person had a counterfeit $20 bill.
Right. Okay.
That's why he went there. It's either that or forge a check or something like that. Now, there's no proof that George Floyd even knew he had a counterfeit 20.
Right.
Okay, the court would determine that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Sure.
you go ahead and arrest him because he's passing fake money. Okay, but let the court determine if he knew he had it in his possession, if he was intentionally trying to cash a fake $20 bill or whatever. That's not your job. All right. So anyway, that's what he was responding to.
Right.
A non-violent crime. It wasn't like he was responding to a shootout
Right.
or a stabbing or a rape. A non-violent crime. All right. Now, if he had told the guy in the donut shop that he was talking to when the call came in, if he said, you know what, I'm going to go over there and kill that guy, that would be premeditated murder.
Right.
He's thinking about it, right? So if he didn't do that, for the most part, it would be second degree. But when you are sitting on that man's neck for
There's no
that long,
there's no
huh?
there's no threat.
There's no threat.
Yeah.
And apparently you're waiting for him to take his last breath. At what point do you, I mean, he's already down.
Right.
He's already down. He's handcuffed behind his back. We saw a video that he had never resisted any arrest. The video from the buildings across the street, the built-in cameras or whatever. The one girl had her cell phone facing them. There were videos from across the street that showed them talking to him up against the wall there, searching him. Then they haul him over to the street, put him down on the ground, and handcuff him. He never resisted.
Right.
Right. So, at what point do you get up and put him in your squad car and take him away, or do you sit on his throat, on his neck, for how long? 2 minutes, he's passing out because he can't breathe. But you wait until he takes his last breath, and then you stand up. So how many minutes into that situation are you thinking, I'm going to stay here until he doesn't breathe anymore? That would be premeditated, and that charge could be upped to first-degree murder.
I think it's such a mess because you probably have, well, the autopsy that came out was ridiculous. That's what I understood, which it's
Well,
like,
there were two autopsies. I think the
but then
official one and an independent one.
and the
And
independent
usually,
one was right? Like it was more
yeah,
accurate of, whereas the official one, which is what's ridiculous, like this is a public good. it's trying to say, listen, there's pre-existing conditions and he died of a heart attack, but obviously he died of someone's knee on this carotid artery. So I don't think
Listen,
anyone's just, like, but
they didn't say heart attack. They said he had some issues with his heart.
well, certainly after having your air supply.
Everybody who dies has issues with their heart,
Right.
because when your heart stops beating, you're dead.
Yeah. Ridiculous.
You know?
And I think the concern, and I raised this, we met on the Influencer Salon Zoom.
Yes.
You were talking to, it's Gary Bledsoe, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I keep calling him something else. It's Gary Bledsoe, and he's
Brilliant man.
a civil rights lawyer, I believe.
Yes.
Head of the NAACP in Texas.
Right.
And I had kind of raised the question, not to be difficult, but it was more like a legitimate legal question of were the charges correct? Because I think the fear is, if you put in a charge and you can't absolutely prove it, you're trying to anticipate what happens in trial.
Yeah.
Right. And
Well,
that's the scary part.
what happens is this, if you overcharge somebody,
Yeah.
then
You can't convict.
you can't convict. And with murder, it has to be like unanimous,
Right. It has to
beyond any doubt.
be, right.
You're talking about somebody's life, and so let's say everybody on the jury, 11 of the 12 jurors say yes, first degree. This guy definitely wanted to kill this guy. He had time to think about what he was doing while he was on that guy's constricting his airways. People were telling him, "Hey, the man's bleeding from his nose. Hey, get off him. He can't breathe." You hear him say, "Can't breathe." So you have information
For sure.
and you decide, no, I'm going to go ahead and follow through. So now you get charged with first degree murder, and then if 11 people say, that's what it was, and that one person is like, no, I think second degree,
You're screwed.
then the guy gets off.
Right. Which is why I like to believe, and I don't know this because I'm not in anybody's head, but I like to believe that they took their time to figure out what's the appropriate thing to get this guy on, because he needs to go to jail, right? I don't know that for a fact, but I mean, I hope
he needs more than to go to jail. But here's the thing:
is that going to happen? I don't know.
The county prosecutor for that county in Minneapolis was the idiot, and I'll go ahead and say that. Let him sue me. Who gave this guy third degree murder?
Mm-hmm.
Why? These people work hand in hand. Prosecutors rely on police officers.
Good point.
Okay, because a good prosecutor is someone who in people's minds, a good prosecutor is someone who wins all his cases, who gets all these convictions, who puts the criminals away, right? And generally, even though it's not always the case, people tend to think that if somebody is arrested and brought up on charges, they're guilty.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the assumption, and we all know that oftentimes the judge will believe the police more than they'll believe the defendant.
Well, they're an expert witness, and in the law, they're a peace officer, and so
exactly, precisely
different in the law.
Exactly.
Probably affects charge him, right?
Right, and now every now and then, a rare the good prosecutors are the ones who see, something is wrong with this case. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go ahead and take off my prosecutorial hat and say that guy is innocent. I'm not going to convict him. That rarely happens, but it does every now and then, and that is an honest, decent prosecutor. Because there are people in prison, as we know, who are innocent. 30 years later, DNA proves it or something, mm-hmm. and they knew it back then, but they went ahead and did it because that's their job to prosecute. All right, so prosecutors rely on police because the police bring the evidence to give the prosecutor so that he can win the case. Sometimes police plant the evidence, but hopefully they have gathered enough real evidence and can present it, and this person can be prosecuted and imprisoned. All right, and that makes the prosecutor look good. But I can tell you right now, there have been way many cases. See, they work hand in hand, where you help me, I help you. So if a police officer gets in trouble, um, and the prosecutor goes to prosecute the cop, guess what? All of a sudden, all of his or her other cases that he's trying to prosecute, police lose evidence.
Right.
Um, I don't have that. I don't know what happened to it.
I mean, this
So
is
the
a
pro-
big comparison, but look at the
so so the prosecutor loses the case
how about losing
because
like the entire witness?
yeah, exactly. Okay,
Terrible.
so it's
Like I
like
thought instead of
we will give you your evidence to put this guy away, but you protect us when we get in trouble. Otherwise, we're gonna withhold stuff. You see what I'm saying?
oh,
So
totally get it.
this
Yeah.
prosecutor just gave Chauvin a slap on the wrist, third degree. So that's why the new prosecutor came in and said, this is BS.
Oh, so it was a new prosecutor that.
Yeah, there's a new prosecutor. Keith Ellison
Okay.
is the one who took over the case from the county prosecutor.
Unfortunately, I'm not really aware.
Yeah. The new prosecutor is the one who gave him the second degree.
And there's obviously like just a ton of pressure on this now and microscope because of I mean, I think the reaction to this is obviously justified because there's an execution on camera, and regardless of the person's position, people aren't buying into that as being protecting the public good. I mean, there's
Right.
something else going on. It's horrible, right? So it makes sense that they got rid of the guy when he tried to go too light, which I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Is third degree like a manslaughter?
It might as well be.
Maybe, right?
It's not, but it might as well be.
I don't know. I'm not a legal expert, but
Well, I'm not either. But it's like right on that cusp.
It's insulting and it's disgusting from a public point of view. It's like ridiculous. I mean, you got adds insult to egregious injury, right?
Right.
So obviously, I mean, that really illustrates. It's crazy because you started out with this interesting worldview as a kid, and what you've done so eloquently is lay out like, listen, this is the real experience of even someone with a worldview of what I now have for the majority of my life dealt with, and I'm not alone. Which is,
Yeah.
like there's two different worlds in one place.
And now we're seeing the people who look like the people who we feel are putting this on us are now marching with us en masse. And that helps. That helps to have that voice, because our voice, the Black voice, has not been heard. It has been shut down. People have put earplugs in. They don't want to hear us. We've been saying this for over a century, for decades, and we get shut down. No, we don't want to hear that. And constantly, we are being treated this way, by law enforcement. And then we go to the courts, and the judicial system is broken. There are more Blacks in prison than white people. Yes, that's true, but a lot of it is the inequity of the judicial system. Some of it is poverty. They can't afford the lawyers that the white people can afford. But consequently, you have a lot of Black people who've pled guilty to some charge, so they can that they didn't do, so they can get out earlier.
Right.
It's crazy.
You make a good point, which is even the poverty element plays into what's, I mean, if you have a lot of extreme poverty, you're doing extreme things that get you on the radar, right?
Sometimes, yeah.
Or it's small things that are perceived as,
Look, we had a moratorium on the death penalty here in the state of Maryland. A previous governor imposed a 10-year moratorium on the death penalty so they could study why Black men who had committed a capital crime, excuse me, were being sentenced to death when a white person doing the same exact crime either got life in prison or life with parole. So they had to do a study on it. So they took the death penalty off the books for 10 years to do a study. What the hell are they studying?
Yeah,
White people have been studying black people for 400 years, ever since we've been here, ever since they brought us here in chains. So if you all haven't learned anything in 400 years, you're not going to learn it now. That's my feeling on it.
or even just to study it as opposed to talking to people and understanding. Like I,
Exactly.
I think like this, I come from a perspective because I'm kind of new here, and we see it from the outside of
Right.
the country. And it doesn't mean there's not problems,
Right.
but I don't really understand to the extent until you take me through your personal history. Because I know the public facing part is, you're known for overcoming what could have just been insurmountable view of anyone that doesn't look like you, which is
Right.
you're the enemy. I'm not talking to you, and you're not talking to me.
Right.
But I
So
think this is really the answer, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Have these conversations, have dialogue. And now a lot of white people are joining us. They saw 3 weeks ago what we've been complaining about, or 2 weeks ago, what we have been complaining about for 100 years. They saw it, and now they get it. Because, listen, it hasn't been that long since people like you and me have video cameras,
Right. True.
right? Okay. Even back then, the first major police brutality thing caught on video was Rodney King.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a private citizen who had a video camera named George Halliday. And he must have had a lot of money, because back, we were talking 1990 something, like 93 or something. I don't know, somewhere right around there, or 92 maybe. Back then, the only people who had video cameras were TV stations, and those video cameras were these big things you put on your shoulder,
Right.
you know,
For those.
and they cost thousands of dollars. So the ordinary person like me, can't afford that. But this dude had some money or something. He had himself a video camera,
Interesting.
and he caught it. And guess what? He got a lot of death threats for releasing that video. So now everybody has video cameras, on their cell phone.
Right.
So we're seeing more and more of these incidents, and people are thinking, why is there so much more brutality these days?
There might be
No,
less, but we're seeing the real reality, right?
listen, we've been complaining about that since before video
For sure.
cameras. There's
Totally.
not more. There's not more today. It's still the same amount. It's just that you're seeing more because it's captured. But when we were talking about it before, you all didn't believe us because you didn't see it. Seeing is believing,
Well, I
right?
think even the Rodney King thing, people didn't believe.
Exactly. And the defense was, well, you didn't see what was going on before the video. We don't need to see what was going on before the video. We're talking about what's going on the video. Regardless of what the man had done before the video, you had no right to do what we saw you doing while the video was on. And what did they do? They changed the venue for that trial. That happened in Los Angeles. And where was the trial? In Simi Valley.
Oh, they put it up in Simi Valley.
They put it up in Simi Valley. Yeah, all white jury.
Wow.
This is where there's no crime. The police are loved, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you rarely even get a speeding ticket up there.
To your point, the perspective is totally different. Like you don't have
Precisely
their own little bubble, and
right. So Rodney had to have been doing something to deserve that. That's the attitude. So they acquit the 4 police officers: Stacy Kuhn, Timothy Wind, Theodore Brezinho, and Lawrence Powell. Those are their names. So the defense was, well, you didn't see what was going on before the video camera was turned on.
crazy.
So which is ridiculous. So it's just like trying to say, Well, Mr. Floyd, had a heart condition, and he had drugs in his body, and he had committed crimes before, and da da da. What does that have to do with what was going on right then and there?
Sure. No, I mean, it's right
He could
before
have been
our eyes.
he could have been a career criminal.
It
That
doesn't
did not give you
matter.
the right to
Now,
exactly.
finally, and I think
And that's why women are so hesitant to report rapes, because they get put on the stand and they get re-victimized, like, well, who did you have sex with the night before, or this person said 10 boyfriends in 2 weeks, and what were you wearing? You're wearing high heels and a short skirt. Well, what does that have to do with somebody raping you? Nothing. I
totally.
don't care. I don't care how many sexual liaisons you've had, how you dress. That does not give this man the right to force himself upon you.
It's hard. I mean, I think obviously there's a problem with having a different system where there's just assumption of guilt too, though. So how do we obviously there's got to be some new concept of how to
Hmm.
solve these problems generally, because it's probably not just limited. It's like both sides in the law have advocacy, right? So
Right?
then we got this problems leading up to it. Like it's hard to understand like what's the path forward, because even when um, Gary was talking, I'm like, man, he has like really insurmountable things, it feels like, to overcome. Like it's as much external pressure as there is, it would take significant changes to the law to fix them, right?
Right.
And the question is, okay, well, if you go one extreme, it affects everybody. So it's like I get, but he probably more than anyone has a grasp of those complexities, which I don't.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's been fighting them since the '60s or '50s or whatever. Probably the '60s. Yeah. I mean, the guy is brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. But unless something is in written into the law, there's so many loopholes the other
Hmm.
side can use.
It's so complex.
Absolutely, absolutely. But like I said, I truly believe, everything I'm saying so now, up until now has been, very negative. I'm pointing out all the negativity that's gone on. But I am an optimist. I truly believe we're going to see some changes. I mean, we're already starting to see them, with the expeditious arrests of the officer, the upping of the charge, etc.
Right.
So the page is turning, and I truly believe what is helping that is the amount of white people joining in with us, because now we have a collective voice
Hmm.
of people who look like the people that we were going after, who were saying, no, you all were wrong.
Right.
And so before, when it was predominantly black, like I said, it was like this.
Totally.
People weren't listening to us. And now they're seeing some people who look like them saying, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Now the earplugs are coming out, and they're beginning to hear what's going on. They may not like it, but they're beginning to hear. And that's what's different. Because you see, Obama, the first black president of the United States, black people did not put him in office. You know that, right?
There's no way. There's
There's
not
no
enough
way.
numbers, right? It's
There's
just
not enough black people to
yeah.
do that. All
Yeah.
right. White people put him in office.
Mhm.
And it's because by 2008, the attitude had changed enough that enough white people were willing to take a chance on this man based upon his policies rather than the color of his skin.
Mhm.
Prior to that, there was not enough belief, regardless of what kind of policies. He could have had the same policies 20 years ago, but their attitude was not right. I don't care what he stands for. I do not want a black man in the White House. I don't care what she stands for. I don't want a woman in the White House. In the '60s, it was, I don't care what he stands for. I don't want a Catholic in the White House. And that was John F. Kennedy. He became the first Catholic president of the United States. But they were very opposed to having a Catholic president. And if you remember, there was even questions as to whether a Mormon could be president.
Mitt Romney, right?
Mitt Romney, exactly. You know, who cares what somebody's religion is, what somebody's gender is, what color somebody's skin is, as long as they can run the country. And we call ourselves the most advanced country in the world. Technologically, we are the most advanced country in the world. Ideologically, we're not. There are third world countries who have female presidents, female prime ministers, and leaders. They don't care who runs their country as long as that person is qualified,
Right.
regardless of their gender. We worry about somebody's gender, somebody's religion,
It's
the
a
color of
story.
somebody's skin as to who we want in the White House. So, that to me is Stone Age thinking.
Well, to your point, I think, we broad stroke things way too much, right? Which is, there are people that are smart enough to know that's stupid and I don't think that way. And
Right?
thankfully those voices are coming out. And I think, Obama was an amazing leader, and I think he came in at a dark time. Like, as a guy that was not here, it was like, wow, thank God that guy's coming in, because what was going on before that, all the 9/11 stuff and who was in office, we had a really weird view of America. It was like, wow, this is not going the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's important now. Now is a good time for people who to not be silent.
Mhm.
If you believe in something, then don't just think somebody else will take care of it for you. Let your voice be heard. You might lose some friends over it, people that you have known all your life, but you never realize that they think something different, and you don't want to stir the pot. But either stand up and be truthful, and stand up for what you truly believe in, rather and give up those friends. They're not your friends.
For sure. Yeah, that makes total sense. Like, I think, again, hopefully, I like to think that beyond a certain age, there's less and less of that, and people are on the other side of the spectrum, which is this is
Well, you're right. That's what we're seeing in these marches.
right.
And that's why I say the page is definitely turning. So that's a good thing.
How are you for time, Daryl? I don't want to.
I'm good. I'm good. I think my wife is coming in here shortly, but that's okay.
Okay, sorry. I know we went a little longer than we
No,
probably.
no, no worries.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I probably, to your point, there's a lot of history there, and there's the perspective of people that aren't going away, but
Yes,
hopefully with
indeed.
new generations, we're seeing what you're seeing, which is that we're standing up people that grew up with a more modern perspective of, like,
Right.
these people and my friends are these people and these people, and I'm judging people upon how they treat me and what their ideas are.
And
And
also consider
turn all kind
this.
of tribal things, right?
Right. And also consider this. We are in the midst of a pandemic.
Which is weird.
Yeah, but um, it is highly dangerous to go out around other people right now. In this country alone here, we've had over 110,000 people die just in the past few months from this pandemic, you know? And to go into a crowd situation
And
like
just
you're seeing every day on TV for the last 2 weeks, every day, all day long, all night long, defying curfews, etc. These people are very passionate about it. So they are willing to risk their lives, their not just from the police I'm talking about, but from the pandemic, their health, to go and stand up for what they truly believe. Even people who are not physically affected by police brutality, people who look like you, are willing to come out there and risk their lives during a pandemic to stand up for what's right and what's wrong. All right. This problem of racism has outlasted the pandemic. It was there centuries before the pandemic. We've never had a pandemic during our lifetime.
no,
And
it's
yeah.
been
And
a
like
hundred
most,
years, I think, right?
huh?
It's been like 100 years or something.
Right. The bubonic plague or whatever, was going on back then.
But then that's in
Um,
the ages, but yeah.
yeah.
Like, I was
But
thinking the Spanish flu, but
right, Spanish
I
flu,
know we've had
bubonic,
Ebola.
yeah,
I know we had the H1N1 thing, but this thing is,
right. And every year we get the flu, It comes around every year, right?
Right.
But like most viruses, it's here, hangs around for a while, and then it goes off and it comes back next year. Okay, viruses come and go. Racism has never come and go. All right, it's been here, and now it's time for it to go. So we're willing to put ourselves at risk during a deadly virus, a deadly pandemic, to come out there and make something that has been around a lot longer than coronavirus. Put a stop to that. That says something. That really does.
Sorry, the scientific part of my brain went off, but which is I think 40,000 years old, but it probably still is older, right? Like racism is probably actually maybe older than that.
Well, it may be, but in this country, it's not older than that.
Yeah, sorry, I
Uh,
lost my train of thought for a second. So I guess your part of your legacy has been one, like I really appreciate and want to acknowledge you for this because given everything, even just you individually have been through and your perspective, for you to be able to talk and share with me without fear, first of all, which I mean, you shouldn't be, but I could see where a lot of people would just be like walled off to even having those types of conversations.
sure.
So it's to your, and maybe it's partially influenced by your earlier worldview, but it's a big credit to you just that you can have that. Because I think that's really, really critical, right?
A missed opportunity for dialogue is a missed opportunity for conflict resolution.
Love it.
And I appreciate what you're doing because you and I are having these conversations, and that's great. But you are going to disseminate our conversation to people out there who might not otherwise have heard your perspectives or my perspectives, just to offer them something else to think about. I mean, we're not saying this is the end, one all end all. We're just saying this is something for you to think about and make up your own mind.
I think the missus is there.
Yeah.
How's it going?
She can't hear you. I got my earbuds
Oh,
in.
that's awesome. So how much of, I think from me, my introduction to you was this phenomenal story about how you came to the most, an extreme racist situation with these KKK guys, to your point, who are, I mean, they're wearing,
They're invested in it.
yeah, they're wearing uniforms. There's a history, like you talked about before, of, well, I'm in it because my daddy was in it, my grandfather was in it. They're in a geographic bubble and a cultural bubble. And for you to be able to penetrate that, I think number one is just it speaks testaments to not only your character, but also your, I don't know if it's methodology or your worldview to do that. Like your ability to see past that and fight through it to help someone else change their perspective.
Well, initially that wasn't my mission. My mission was just to find out, because I never thought anybody was going to change. My mission was just to find out, how can you hate me? You don't even know me. I just want to know what goes, because I could not understand how you just look at me and you determine that I'm inferior
Mm-hmm.
by the color of my skin. You know nothing about my educational background. You know nothing about the travel I've done, um, my accomplishments. My non-existent criminal record, the fact that I'm not on welfare. Nothing about my history. All you see is this. That's all you see,
Right.
and you make these assertions about me as fact. I just want you to explain that to me. That's what I was there for. And then um, over time, these conversations, because what I found out is this: while you are actively learning about someone else, like me trying to learn about them, when you are actively learning about someone else, at the same time, you don't realize it, you are passively teaching them about yourself. So while I think I'm gleaning all this information from them, they're looking me up and down and making assessments in their mind that I can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly when they go home, they're not going to concede to me that day, because they've got too much invested their whole life
Oh my
into
God,
this
yeah,
racist ideology, right?
right.
So that,
It's a friggin' ideology. You're right.
exactly. So, but when they get home, they have to think about something. Man, I just sat down with some black guy and had a conversation with him. Some of the things he was saying are right,
It
but he's
blows the
black.
guy's mind. He probably can't even admit it initially.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So they think, okay, I'm right, but I'm black. But he's right, but he's black. So it's that cognitive dissonance thing going on.
Mm.
And then, and then they think, okay, well, hell, I'm seeing him again next week or whatever, and I give them some more. So the first time was the planting of the seed. The second time I come, I'm watering that seed. I'm feeding it. And so they go home this time and they're having more of that cognitive dissonance. And they're slowly begin to, they're seeing, I want the same things for my family as he wants for his family. We both speak the same language. We both speak English.
Mhm.
He understands every word I say. I understand every word he says. Um, I'm allowing him to air his views about me, about black people, about whatever he wants to talk about. And I'm not giving him any pushback. I'm letting him speak. Now, if I don't agree with him, I still let him speak. And then I correct him or I say, I disagree with you on this, and here's why. But most of the times when they talk to somebody whom they consider an adversary or somebody they don't like or who they hate, a Jewish person, a gay person, a black person, you know, as soon as they say something negative about that person, like, you're a criminal, you're on welfare, blah, 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 they get pushback. Someone wants to slap their face and so forth and so on. I'm listening to all this and I'm taking it all in and I'm not reacting that way.
Right.
So they're thrown off their game because, they're ready for the fight. They're invested in their beliefs and they're ready for the fight. They're ready for me to, they want to push my buttons and get ready for me to react. And I don't do that. And for the first time, they've been able to elaborate on how they feel. And then I let it all come out and then I say what I got to say. And so they have to wonder about that. And the fact that I know a lot about their ideology, even though they don't like me, they respect me because I've done my homework.
Mhm.
So their respect meter goes up for me. Their like meter might not go up, but their respect meter goes up. And then by the third or fourth time, whatever, they begin to like me a little bit, you know. And here's what's funny. People will say, well, why do they hate? Well, these people are white supremacists is not stamped out of a standard cookie cutter. They come from all different walks of life. Some are third grade dropouts, some are college graduates. It goes the whole spectrum. Um, So that depends. But one thing they do have in common, when I first would interview them, and this is over 35 years, different ones, I would spend time with them. They would not ask me any questions initially. It wouldn't be until maybe weeks later, months later, I'd be the one asking all the questions. Like with you, for example, if if I were to come hang out with you or whatever, and I say to you, so what do you think about President Trump's policy on blah blah blah? You would tell me what you think, and then you'd probably say to me, well, what do you think?
Mhm.
And then, it'll be a back and forth.
Right.
What do you think about abortion? Oh, you tell me, what do you think? So you know what I think, right? So they don't do that because in their eyes, I am inferior to them.
Weird.
I don't have anything of value to share with them.
Right.
Why even ask my opinion? So if I ask them a question, they'll give me the answer and then they'll sit there and wait for the next question. They have no reason to ask me my opinion on anything because it's worthless. I'm black. Just like I'm worthless, my opinion is worthless. So this will go on, like I said, for weeks, maybe months. And then one day out of the blue, I'm talking and I'm asking questions, and then they'll say, well, after they answer the question, well, I think blah blah blah. Well, what do you think, Daryl? Or what do you think, Mr. Davis? I'm like, huh?
Yeah,
What?
so you saw over time a change is what you're saying.
Yeah. In other words, just that one little thing. What? You're asking me my opinion? I have some little modicum of value that you want to know what I'm thinking about something. That's big.
That
You know,
opened
that
up, like, to you probably as a very, very curious guy where you're like, "Okay, now they're finally curious."
yeah, exactly. Precisely.
Yeah, it's like, "Why is he
Precisely.
letting me talk?"
Yeah.
'Cause he's not doing it to, because he's afraid. He's not doing it because he thinks what I think.
Right.
So it's interesting. However, what
So,
period of time that finally kinda cracked did you find?
well, I mean, it depends upon the person. It could be weeks, could be months, but that's what happens. They become curious about your opinion. So in other words, they're beginning to humanize you,
Mm,
and you have some little bit of value they're wondering about. So I will answer the question honestly, and that's when they go home and they think about my answer, and they do whatever research they have to do, or it occurs to them, he's right. But the only thing that separates them accepting that they know I'm right, knowing somebody's right, and accepting that they're right are two different things, right? So you might know somebody's right, but you don't want to accept it. All right, they know I'm right, but the battle that they have to accepting it is the fact that I'm black, because it goes against their whole ideology,
bizarre, but
right?
yeah, it makes
And
total sense, right?
right, and so then they struggle with that, and so that's that cognitive dissonance thing, and they have to decide: do I accept that he's black? Do I believe the truth and turn my life around, or do I continue living a lie?
Because then
That
it's
that
about them, right? It's like you've gotten to the core of who they are really are beyond that
precisely,
ideology.
precisely, and so that's when I don't change them; they change themselves. I am the impetus, the seed planter for their change. Now, even though the media says, black musician converts X number of Klan people, I didn't convert anybody. I didn't even convert one.
That's the
They
headline
did it.
result. Yeah.
Yeah, they did it. I just gave them the reason to do it. Now, to your point, how long does it take? Again, it depends upon the individual. It depends upon how much somebody is invested in that. If as you were mentioning earlier, their grandfather's in the Klan, their father's in the Klan, they're in the Klan, they got the kids in the Klan, or that ideology, whatever it is, Klan, neo-Nazi, white supremacist ideology. If it's a family tradition, it may take a lot longer than if they just joined the thing last week, and,
Mhm.
and they don't have any family members in there.
There's investment there that
Investment, okay, exactly. And if they are a ranking member,
their
okay,
status and their whole being is like
their
what.
whole being, yeah, and they have all these subordinates who look up to them.
Mhm.
How do they say to their followers, "I was wrong"?
Uh,
And do they want to give up that power?
mm.
Everybody likes power. Nobody wants to give up power, right? So how do you tell somebody that 200 or 300 people, or however many you have, even 10, 15 people, I was wrong? So they have to think about that too. Is the power worth my living a lie, or do I release myself from this ignorance and do something different?
Which explains first of all, kudos to you for the phenomenal patience and continued curiosity to keep going back into that den.
Listen, let's talk about patience for a second. Um,
Explains why it took so long, is what I was gonna say, but
yeah, but here's the thing. Because I hear people say all the time, I don't have time. I do not have the patience to sit down with somebody like that. I don't have time for that,
Mhm,
and that kind of thing. Well, here's the thing: when you and I were in elementary school at some point in time,
right?
and you know there was the bully, that we would see at school, um, who would bully us because we had freckles, or because we wore glasses, or because we had different clothing or whatever. People would get bullied, and it might hurt our feelings. Be called names by this person. So we'd go home crying, and our mom would tell us, "Listen, you know, don't don't pay attention to him. Ignore him. All he wants is a reaction, and the more you give him the reaction, the more you're feeding him. If you ignore him and don't give him what he wants, he's going to leave you alone. So the next day we go to school, and the bully kid comes around and starts bullying us for whatever reason, and we follow our mom's advice. And sure enough, we ignore him. He's not getting the reaction that he wants, so he goes on pissing somebody else and leaves us alone. Our mom is right in that situation. If you have a stomach ache or a headache, you can wait a few hours and it will go away. It'll go away on its own. And it's not going to be with you, you know, all month long, your stomach ache or your headache, right? It'll go away a couple hours. Racism is not the bully. Racism is not the common stomach ache or the common headache. It has to be treated for it to go away. And if you went to your doctor for some kind of checkup or whatever, and your doctor says, Mike, I hate to tell you this, but you are in the beginning stages of lung cancer. You can't say, I'll just ignore it, it'll go away. No. What happens if you ignore any kind of cancer? It doesn't go, it metastasizes, right? And spreads and consumes your whole body, and then you go away. So at the first inkling that you have some kind of cancer, you must immediately address it to, at best, eradicate it, and at the very least, put it into remission. You know, our mom is right about ignoring certain things, but racism is a cancer. We cannot ignore it. If you ignore it, it will metastasize. It will spread from generation to generation to generation. All right, and it will consume and destroy, you know, what is around. So you must address it immediately, and it takes patience. If the cancer doctor tells you, you know, you got all kinds of things you got to do in your life. You're a young guy, you're a busy guy, you got a job, you got a business, you got whatever you got going on. He tells you, you got to stay home for 6 weeks and have 6 weeks of radiation, and then you're gonna have 2 weeks off, and then we're going to do a regimen of 4 weeks of chemo. And you can say, wow, you know, that's 12 weeks. You know, 6, 2, and 4. I can't take off for 12 weeks.
You don't have much choice, though.
Exactly.
But it's interesting that you
don't have any choice. You have to have that patience, whether you like it or not. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to if you want to get rid of this racism thing, you know, they didn't turn racist overnight. You know, they are invested in it. Whether they moved to a community that was full of racists and they had to go along with the community in order to survive there and join, you know, whatever's going on in that community. I mean, you know, or their family is in it, you know, or whatever is causing them to be invested in it. You know, it didn't happen overnight. So you just can't turn it on and off like a light bulb. You've got to take your time, be patient. You know, it's like losing weight. You know, you don't put on the weight overnight, so you're not going to lose it overnight. You know, you got to keep going to the gym time and time again. It's over time.
I find it phenomenal that you even still, to your point, like, number one, the analogy makes total sense, but that you specifically took it upon yourself to have that. Again, it goes back to like the commitment to being the guy to, at least in some small way, treat a cancer.
Yeah, but look, here's the thing. The country can only become one of two things. Your country, it can become, number one, that which you stand up and make it become, or that which you sit back and just see what it becomes. So you have to ask yourself, do I want to sit back and see what my country becomes, or do I want to stand up and make it become what I want to see? Those are the only two choices. And so all these people who talk about, I'm a patriot, I love my country, you know, I cry every time I hear the national anthem, and I hold my hand over my heart and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and all this other kind of stuff. They are so full of themselves, unless they are actually standing up for what they're pledging. One nation, you know the Pledge of Allegiance, you took it, right?
Right.
when you
Yeah.
became an American citizen.
Yep.
One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Number one, we are not one nation indivisible. We are very divided. So that right there is a falsehood. All right. Um, there is not liberty and justice for all. We know that. We saw it 2 weeks ago on camera.
Hmm.
We've been seeing it for 400 years.
It's been 2 weeks. That's crazy, but true.
Yeah. Okay. So, when you tell me you love the flag and you love this, and you think, somebody who kneels, is being disrespectful and unpatriotic and blah blah blah. No. Uh. Uh. So if you're all that patriotic, then why aren't you standing up to be indivisible? Why aren't you standing up to be liberty and justice for all? Just telling me that it rings hollow. It's empty.
So that paints the battle that's been going on for a while, obviously, which is
Right.
me in my head in part politics. And the question is, are politics? Uh, to me, politics are always going to have opposing sides. That's the nature of it. That's what it is. And then,
Right. And that's fine.
but
But
is that the way to govern this situation going forward?
but hold it.
Because
But
it's
but
like
see, but
with politics,
politics have to do with policy, right?
right?
You know, um, funding for this as opposed to funding for that. This is a little bit more liberal. This is a little bit more conservative, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, but politics should not play into humanity.
Well, that's kind of my point, which is like, why are we investing continue? It's not that you want to destroy the system, but there has to be a new idea because it's just gonna, when I watch, there's a movie. Have you seen the movie The Candidate?
Oh, I saw the original one long time with Robert
Yeah,
Redford or somebody a long
exactly.
time
That
ago.
movie, and
Yeah.
that movie's from 1972, I think. And if you watch it, it's about a politician that's a reluctant politician,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Based upon his legacy of a father. But the issues are the same issues, and that's 1972, right? So it's like 50 years, almost 48 years. Jeez, I'm old. But that's why I guess it's not that you hate the system. I mean, the system's got problems, but will the system change enough if the idea continues to be left right?
Um, I think it will, and because there's always the middle ground.
That's
But people have to learn how to respect one another and have civil discourse. I
mhm.
may not agree with you, but I'm willing to listen to you, and in exchange, oh, I'm willing to listen to you too. So let's talk. Well, here's what I like about what you're saying, and here's what I don't like. And here's what I like about what you're saying. Here's what I don't like. So let's meet on the common ground, and let's work on those things that we both like and expand. And as we get to know one another, our views begin to shape and change. You know, um, for example, I did not really come in contact with a lot of gay people.
Mhm.
Growing up, um, there may have been some, but I was not in constant contact with them as far as I knew. But certainly back then, growing up, that was kind of taboo. If they were around, they didn't really, come out openly.
Mhm.
And then by the time I got to college, I majored in music and in the fine arts. You find a lot of gay people. A lot of my teachers were gay. A lot of my classmates were gay, and so that's where I came to know these people and appreciate their knowledge, their skills, their talents, and their abilities in the arts and things like that. The arts attracted them. Um, so I saw a different side than I saw when I didn't, know them or be around them, and all of that shapes your perspectives.
Yeah, which is, I mean, part of it's the arts and part of it's education, but in the end, to your point, it's the exposure to those other people and perspectives.
And
Uh,
I'm willing to put myself forward to expose something to people who otherwise would not be sitting around in a social setting with somebody like me.
Makes total
And
sense.
but now the danger is not, I mean, not just a danger to me. Yes, I mean, there's that. Okay, but that's not what I'm worried about or concerned about. The danger is you must not allow it to get to the point where it's like, oh, well, Daryl's okay for a black guy.
Yeah,
It's everybody
you're
else
still
that that's
like hating
that
it.
we don't like.
Yeah.
So that so I make sure that when I reach a point where I can trust them that they don't pose a danger to me, then they probably will not pose a danger to friends of mine. And I will begin introducing them to other black people, to Jewish people, to other white people who disagree with them. And that way they realize, oh, Daryl is not an exception. There are other people who think like this too. We just thought it was Daryl.
Well, and I think that's like the truth of the matter is that there's probably a lot of people in different walks of life and whatever the politics are that are of enough common ground that way that, you know, I guess the question is how do you facilitate these conversations? And I guess what you've done is one at a time.
Yeah, yeah, and then I get a lot of flack for not addressing it systemically. You know,
That's
there's
what I
no
was saying
one.
before, though.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, but this is what I was saying about Gary, which is his approach is the more difficult one, I feel,
Hmm.
which is he's trying to fight, um, which obviously needs reform, but I don't know if reform is the answer around a judicial system. And these external events are putting pressure on it, so maybe that's a really good thing in the end. But short term, like you don't want people to go through their entire life and not have that exposure and have those conversations.
Right.
There needs to be like not just Daryl, but we got to
It
get
needs to be a lot of people need to get on board. There are many different facets to solving the problem. It's not one method.
right.
It solves the whole deal because you got individuals who are racist. You got a system that's racist,
Sure.
etc. So you got to have people working on the systemic side. You got
Right.
to have people working on the individual side, people working on the legal side.
Mhm.
All kinds of different facets, and we all work as a team together. That's the problem because um, you shouldn't be criticizing somebody who's not working on it from your perspective, as long as they're working on it. Okay, and
Yep.
you've got to coordinate and cooperate with one another. Each entity is a specialist in what he or she does to address it. I specialize in what I do. Somebody else does something else,
True.
but we don't bash each other. We should coordinate with each other and cooperate. So that is a multi-pronged attack on it.
Oh, and I hope you don't think I was bashing
No,
anyone.
no, 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 no. I'm just pointing out
But
that
I'm
that's
thinking
what
like
happens.
I'm a problem thing, and I'm like
No, no, no.
the more
That's
direct
what.
path seems to be what you're doing, and which is like I've grown up in a unique perspective, so I'm lucky that way.
Yeah.
Where I mean, my best friend's Jamaican since I'm 10, right?
Hmm.
I had my Jamaican mom and my regular mom. That's not because of anything other than we were
Right.
our families were friends, and we were
Exactly.
friends. And then I have my Guyanese friend, my Italian. Like, it's just very different in Canada. It doesn't mean there's not problems.
Right.
It doesn't mean
Right.
people don't have perspectives. I just
And
look
and
at
and
that
and,
versus
how, and
this,
and
and I
when
go,
you see
how do
when
we?
you see when you see other people who've not had that unique experience that you have,
It's hard
and
to.
they're leery of Guyanese people or Jamaican people,
It's
you feel bad for them. It's like you're really missing out on a lot.
a
If
lot,
only a lot. If only I could give this person the exposure that I've had, they would see something different.
right?
And so, sometimes it's not their fault. Sometimes it is their fault if they live in a multicultural environment and they just shut themselves off and don't take advantage of
Sure.
what's around them. That's their own stupidity or whatever. But but people who don't who are demographically in some other place, and they don't have the exposure,
Right.
then you don't really blame them for making perspectives because they see whatever they see in the movies or on TV or some comic book or whatever wherever they get their information, and that's where their perspectives are shaped. Yeah.
Comic books, maybe, right? Well, so I think what I'm trying to drive at is, you've set a phenomenal example, but I don't think it's out of like, this is, I'm sure there's an element that's very heavy and difficult for you, but there's
Mhm.
that curiosity. And I think what we're saying together, I hope, is people need individually to have more curiosity about other cultures. And you start with what's in front of you and in your own backyard and be curious about and investigate from that perspective. Like, have that genuine, get out of your ideologies. And
Mhm.
your ideology needs to be not political. And that's kind of what I was driving at, which is politics, I don't think are going to change any of this. There are people that are
Right.
going to fight that fight. But in the end, the pressure that's on the politics is what we're seeing, which is people that are talking have a different world perspective because of their age, their exposure. And I guess what I would encourage people to think about is be curious about other cultures, be curious about other people, and approach it from that point of view because it really doesn't threaten you.
Right. And if you look at these protests, there are more people there than you've ever seen at any Klan rally. There are more people there than you've ever seen at any Trump rally.
Hmm.
There, or any other candidate's rally, Democrat or Republican.
Right. It's the real people.
It's the real people.
Hmm.
That's the voice of the people. Okay, the voice of the people elects you to speak for them. So these politicians, if they're smart, they will shape their politics by the voice of the people. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves out on the street, and they won't be marching; they'll be
Well,
sitting there.
that's the fear, like that nothing changes and you keep putting the same knuckleheads back in charge of major assets, including our, philosophy in a sense, which is embodied in the
Yeah.
law, right? So I hope you're right because
Well, we saw the change in 2008, and I think we're going to see it again in 2020.
we're gonna find out.
We're going to find out. Yeah, we're going to
I
find out.
honestly think that
But
neither side is right. I think that there's some.
huh?
I think what we're seeing is the real people that are right are the people that are having conversations, and I don't know if either of those sides reflect them.
Yeah, but you know what?
I mean, they're
The,
the lesser of
the
two evils, but
the loudest conversation right now is on the streets.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and those are the ones who are going to be going to the polls and
Mm,
voting,
good point.
and that's what's going to shape those politics.
Good point. That
So
is good. I guess it's one of those. Well, Monday morning quarterback it, as they say,
yeah,
December or January, and
yeah,
see
Monday
what
morning quarterback, exactly.
happens, right?
Um,
Daryl,
you
I
know,
don't want to. I want to be conscious of your time because I know we've been like an hour and 49. Are you okay to? I don't know if there's anything that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure that we talk about.
let's talk about rock and roll.
Oh yeah, there we go. All right. What are we talking about? Rock and roll. Let's start there.
Okay, so you know, um, music in this country has been shaped and created, for the most part, what you can call American music,
Hmm.
music that was created right here in our country. I'm not talking about music that was brought over by slaves or brought over by Europeans, from who they listened to, Bach and Beethoven and Rachmaninoff and Mozart, etc. Sure, that's all over here, but that was created in Europe. Slave music was created in Africa. Music that was created here in our country was an amalgamation of what we heard that was brought over from other places. Right? Black people created the blues.
Hmm.
You got more white people today playing blues than black people. Black people created jazz. You have a lot of white jazz artists today.
Hmm.
White people created rock music. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino, Bo Diddley, and their contemporaries.
You know
Right?
my
It
Fats
was
Domino stories. I was like laughing.
yeah, yeah, and it was popularized by white artists like Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Bill Haley and the Comets, Buddy Holly, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison, and you got a Roy Orbison story for me, and and the Everly Brothers, and many others, and then of course, later you would have the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, etc. All of that came from those original rockers, those black original rockers. Um, Soul music, R&B was created by black people. Disco was created by black people. But then you would have more white discotheques than you did black. And they even made a movie about disco music called Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta.
Right.
There's only like one black artist in the whole movie. Even a bubblegum group. Yeah, it was a Donna Summer, right?
Oh my God, that's true. I never thought of that. That's weird.
Yeah, and even a bubblegum group from the '60s. The movie was made in the '70s. A bubblegum group from the '60s who had a lot of bubblegum type pop hits turned disco and became one of the biggest groups out there, the Bee Gees.
Were they a bubblegum group before that?
Yeah,
They're Australian.
yeah.
Australian.
Yeah, I think, are they Australian?
Yeah,
I think so.
they're Australian.
They're not from the States,
No,
but yeah. So they switched over to disco.
that's crazy.
Even funk. Funk was invented by black people. You know, you had a Parliament Funkadelic, Earth, Wind and Fire, all these people, and then it became an industry for white people. The Average White Band, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Wild Cherry, play that funky music, white boy, right? Then we created rap music.
Mm-hmm.
We put out Ice-T. They put out Vanilla Ice. You know,
Yeah.
the biggest rapper today is Eminem, who's had the most. You know, and what color is he?
Drake's the biggest rapper?
Yeah.
You don't think Drake is?
Huh?
You don't think Drake is?
I don't listen to it.
Oh,
But in terms,
but he's taken over the world. So
yeah. But in terms of who has had the most success, most accomplishments, etc., and highest paid, Eminem.
interesting.
And you know, so what has happened is every time we create something, white kids gravitate towards it
Mm-hmm.
because they're tired of hearing whatever it is their parents are listening to, and so they gravitate towards something new. And so the powers that be, the record company executives or whatever, they start putting out that kind of music, but put white artists doing it in order to lure those white kids back.
Mm-hmm.
They put very little money behind what they call urban music. Every record company has different departments. It has its pop department, it has its country music department, and it has its urban music department. Urban is code word for black. And when you think of country music, you think of white. Sure, there are black country fans. There are even black country musicians, but it's a predominantly white genre of music, even though it also was created by black people. Hank Williams, the father of country music, learned to play guitar on the streets of Montgomery, Alabama, by a black blues guitar player named Rufus T-Top Payne.
Wow, that's crazy. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that.
Yeah, look him up. Rufus T-Top, Teeteetot.
I feel like I know.
Rufus, yeah, Rufus T-Top Payne, Payne.
There we go.
Okay, and if you listen to country music, all it is blues. The only thing that makes it, only thing that makes it country is a white guy singing it with a twangy voice. That's it.
My best friend would always joke, and he'd make really good fun of it. It was awesome. He'd say that country would steal all their dances. I'm like, what do you
Country
mean?
would what?
Country would steal all his dances. Like my Jamaican friend Dan.
Yeah. And they do all these little line dances. Yeah.
Slow down hip hop dance.
I
was like, wow, damn, you are right. I'm not a music fan. I grew up personally with obviously the hip hop era of early 80s, and then became Tribe and soul and all that. But more than anything, I would say for me, house music is the music that's been consistent. Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto. Toronto was and there was that was a very it pulled from different genres, but it was revolutionary. And I think what the house community, to me, I was like, listen, we don't need this party and this party. We need a house party.
Yeah, there you go.
Which people might think is a party at your house, which I guess it could be. But
right.
To me, it's this culture is different. So, but anyways, sorry, not to break your train of thought.
Yeah. So, music has always drawn people from different walks of life, and that's a good thing.
I think so.
And it should be tapped into to listen. What do people who are running for office do when they have their campaigns? They bring in musicians to play
Pick a theme.
top names because they figure, if if I get Willie Nelson to play for my campaign, all his fans are going to vote for me, right? So regardless of whether their fans are Democrat or Republican, if you got Willie Nelson or Michael Jackson or whoever is up there, all of their fans are going to cater towards you. And so what's interesting is these politicians will use or exploit musicians for these purposes, and then when they get in office and the budget needs to be cut and the economy is going down, first things they cut are the arts.
We probably want them out of music, though, right? We want that junk over there. We don't need that. We'll just make music.
Yeah, there you go.
It goes back to my personal viewpoint that, again, the politics stuff gets in the way. And I think what you're hitting on is what I believe, which is the culture should not be isolating. And I think we talk, you hear about people stealing each other's culture, but to me, that's how you understand someone and you have a combined perspective. It's like that thing you can relate to that's maybe non-threatening, but also appealing. So, and I think that's how maybe a lot of people that think a different way have been influenced by the same music, the same art, even I guess the same entertainment beyond that, right? Like it's a way to have a shared experience and at least a start of an understanding of another culture.
White supremacists like music.
What do they like? I don't even know.
A lot of them like white power music, which is like, rock,
but it's like
which is invented by Black people.
Is it death metal? It's kind of like a fast.
Any kind of rock.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, when you think of heavy metal, hard rock, and you picture, your stereotypical hard rock heavy metal player. Well, first of all, how would you define hard rock? What are some of the characteristics?
I mean, you always think headbangers, obviously.
And what about in terms of sound?
Like musically? I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah, musically.
Very limited chord progressions, but I mean, hard rock is usually the same kind of heavier bass, heavier, it's like 3 chords usually, right? Like it's like not like really.
You can have 3 chords, maybe 4 chords, whatever. But so does rock and roll. A lot of rock and roll just has 3 chords. Country music just has 3 chords, So does the blues. So what is different in the sound of those 3 chords in heavy metal or rock? Or
I mean, I guess in a sense you could say the aggression of it, right? Like
the aggression. How about the tone?
The tone, that makes sense. Yeah.
What do you hear in the tone?
In heavy metal? I'm not
a
metal guy, but again, I think the word that keeps coming to my head is aggression. But what do you think?
Don't you hear a lot of distortion?
True.
It's not it's not clear, clean.
That's true.
There's a lot of fuzz and distortion and all that kind of stuff. So we've defined the tone, the aggression. So now when you picture somebody playing this music, what does that person look like? Well, the premier instrument is what?
The guitar.
In that genre, yes, the guitar.
Sure.
So when you picture the stereotypical heavy metal, hard rock guitar player, give me a description of that person. What do you see here?
I mean, I'm thinking hair metal personally, but they're pretty rough and they got again, goes back to the headbanger thing for me. But
so describe this person to me that you're seeing on stage doing this.
I mean, I picture Axl Rose, but
okay, from Guns N' Roses,
right?
And anybody else?
Living Color.
Okay, Vernon Reid, good friend of mine.
He's awesome. I'm like, is he making music anymore? By the way.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Now, okay, now.
Thanks. Sorry, Daryl.
Okay, no worries. I just finished my thought that I want to hear your Roy Orbison story. Yeah. Then we'll end it. Okay, so yeah. So, when you picture generally a hard rock person, whatever, it's usually some white guy, long blonde
True.
hair, and spandex pants, and a distorted guitar,
Right.
you know. But all that was started by a black guy. His name was Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, of course, yeah. Although I hate connecting Jimi Hendrix to what I think of as hair metal, but he's
But that
brilliant,
he
like that revolutionized like guitar music and everything.
exactly. You know, he was the Chuck Berry of the '60s.
Right.
Okay, um, you know, everybody played that rock and roll style, and then they played that hard rock style, and everything is has been a mutation of what Chuck Berry created,
True.
and then Hendrix took it to another level,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then somebody else, Eddie Van Halen, or whoever else, and beyond.
True.
All right, just like you have BB King, and then there would be no Stevie Ray Vaughan or Eric Clapton without BB King. So you have these things. Yeah.
Isn't there a story about how Eric Clapton went to go see Jimi Hendrix and he cried? Because
I
because
don't
how
know that he cried, but yeah, he went to see him. Yeah, and was totally like blown away.
yeah.
And see, back then, only musicians appreciated Hendrix. The
Interesting.
general public did not. He got booed off stage
What?
when uh, he opened up for the Monkees. Remember
Oh,
the Monkees?
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and people did not understand what this man was doing with the guitar. It was all distorted. It didn't sound right.
Mhm.
And now they're trying to figure out, how did he do that?
Yeah.
He was ahead of his time. That's what it was.
He played it upside down too.
Yeah, backwards, upside down,
Yeah.
left-handed.
Crazy.
He
Yeah.
didn't change the strings.
Right.
So Albert King, same way. You know Albert King?
I don't know Albert King. I don't think I
Look
do.
him up. Albert King plays a flying V guitar.
What era was he?
What era? Same
Yeah.
as BB King
Oh, the same as BB King. Okay. Oh my
and
God.
Freddie
I
King.
didn't see
Yeah,
that. People can't see this, but he
yeah.
got a flying
Uh
V.
huh.
What? That is crazy. It almost looks like George Benson with a flying V. Oh no, he's a little different. I was like,
Yeah,
I mean, George Benson's a brilliant guitarist.
yeah. Now you were hearing George Benson. Well, your parents were, but you probably were too, long before you ever heard of him. He was a studio jazz guitar player. He played on everybody's records. But a lot of records, don't give credits and
Mhm.
names of the
Right.
studio players. And so he decided to go commercial, and that's when most people begin to know, he's playing this masquerade or on Broadway or whatever. But they've been hearing him for years and just didn't realize it was
I
him.
mean, there's a phenomenal talent. I kind of geek out
Yeah.
on music like you do probably, but I think your
So
point is like it came from, African American or Black.
exactly,
But
exactly.
do you feel that it's a positive that it comes into the like a cross cultural thing?
Yes, it's a positive for sure,
Okay.
because music is a connector. It
Right.
brings people together.
I believe
The
that.
problem comes when it's time to give credit where credit is due,
Sure.
and that's the problem. Um, they don't want to give credit to Black people. Vernon Reed.
Who do you think doesn't want to? Like the fans? Because I feel like
No. The fans do, and the musicians do.
yeah.
It's the record companies
Well,
and the
hopefully
older
those
people,
are
the
being
establishment. The
hopefully those are
establishment.
being eroded though. 'Cause,
Huh?
I mean, the music labels are not good for music
No,
in general,
not at all.
regardless of who you are.
They're right. They're in it for the money.
Yeah, and they're
Okay.
looking at this mass sort of formula thing, and they bury a lot of artists. They do a lot of really bad stuff to artists.
Yeah. Yeah, they sign them up for contracts and then don't
It's
promote them, and they lock them in there.
talk
They
about
can't get
criminality.
out.
I mean, it's kind of the contract
Yeah.
is ridiculous, but hopefully,
Um,
anyways, I think to the point I was just raising was, I think hopefully we're using music as a non-structural political way. We're using the arts to connect everybody, right? To have a conversation about, I like this culture, I'm experiencing this culture, I acknowledge where it comes from, to your point. So too.
yeah. But Vernon Reed, the founder and leader of Living Color, he's a good friend of mine.
Is he?
And
Oh, wow.
yeah. And when he first got started, he's playing rock music.
Yeah.
Okay. That is a Black genre, that has been afterwards commandeered and dominated by white culture. So when he went to try to get a record deal to different record labels, they would not accept him. They told him, no, not that kind of music. Bring us some funk or something like that. What they were associating with black people.
Yeah.
All right. And Vernon like, no, this is black music. This is what I play.
It
wasn't until Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones saw him in a club and liked what he was doing and offered to produce a couple tracks.
You're kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So Mick Jagger produced a couple tracks on Vernon's recording. And then, of course, it gets the record company's attention.
Right.
Because it's Mick Jagger. And Mick Jagger got his start playing black music. Mm-hmm. Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters.
And I think that the TV show of the same name really helped, which I think was also a culturally still impactful thing that launched like a whole bunch of people like J-Lo and Fox. And I mean, you can start all the Wayans, like
Wayne, right.
Yeah. So it was a great time. Like, I mean, I love that whole period because there was so much interesting stuff and it wasn't homogenous, right? It was like, this is funny. This is entertaining. This is challenging. I mean, so many crazy things came out of In Living Color. And Vernon, I mean, I love In Living Color. I love Fishbone, actually, by the way. I don't know if that's a weird one. You know who Fishbone is, right?
I know who they are, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the, I've never been a big rock type guy, but that's like one of the few CDs I remember playing. And actually, I think I had the cassette at one point.
Don't say 8-track, right?
Play that. No, I don't think I think they were post 8-track.
Yeah. So tell me your Roy Orbison story. I'll let you go there.
Oh yeah. Well, and not to cut you off. I know we've talked for a while, so I want to be conscious of your time too. Daryl, first, before I tell you my Roy Orbison story, I want to say thank you so much for spending so much time with me.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Let's talk anytime. I also want to actually invite you personally on June 28th, and maybe we can send you details. We're having a Zoom house party.
Okay.
And bring your wife and whoever else you want. But the last one we did was a lot of fun. We had some really interesting people. And my wife kind of did some speakers. So we had actually, you might see Arabian Prince was on the podcast before. And he kind of talked about his VC work from NWA. Because he's a VC here in LA. So he does like venture capital.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so he talked a little bit. And then my friend Casey, who owns a COVID lab, talked. So I don't know, we'll have somebody that's interesting.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'll send you details on that.
All right.
And I want to acknowledge what you're doing because I think, what really struck me, and if I haven't already said it, is, first of all, your courage, but your curiosity. And I think that's really very important because you could be the age you're at and the experience you've had and not had that ability to go outside of yourself and have the courage to do that. And I think that's what I want people to take away from this, which is it's one conversation at a time and it's going out your comfort zone and I think there's a really bad word that we use. It's called tolerance. And I'll tell you why I don't like it. Well, or appreciation, right? Because I think there's a spectrum there. And whenever I hear people talk tolerance, it drives me nuts.
I know. I'm the same way.
And then even acceptance is like, well, I don't like it, but I accept it. Mm-hmm. Whereas appreciation and then understanding where you've resonated and you've gone out and talked to people. And so I really want to acknowledge you for that. And I think that's the real story of Daryl Davis, of what comes out of it for me. Okay, so shifting gears. I think I mentioned to you that I had two stories. One, I told you my Fats Domino story of my grandfather, which was that how we used to have pictures on the wall in our house. And my grandfather, for anybody that doesn't know, is French Canadian. And he used to run a nightclub in Toronto called the Embassy Room. And he would never talk about the pictures. And then at some point I got a little older and I asked him, after my grandmother had passed away, I said, all right, what's the deal behind these pictures? And he told me two stories that
Why wouldn't he talk about them?
I think my grandmother didn't want him to talk about it. And actually, you might understand after you understand the Roy Orbison thing, which is what I kind of took from it. But I think that there was, well, you'll understand if you hear the Roy Orbison story. But I think when she passed, I intuitively knew that would change things. So I said, all right, buddy. And I set him up, I gave him a drink and I said, let's talk about the pictures. And the one was the story of how he jumped on stage with Fats Domino. and was drumming. And I said to him, the way I found out was I said, Grandpa Claude, I didn't know that you could play the drums. And his answer was, well, I did that night.
Okay.
So he jumped on stage. He's never played the drums before that or since. That's the only time he's played it. The other story is about Roy Orbison. And I kind of attribute in an indirect way to being alive because of Roy Orbison, because he's the one that told my grandfather, who had a girlfriend at the time, running the club. And my grandfather's told me that when Roy would stay in Toronto, he would live with my grandfather. So my grandfather ran the club and he had a girlfriend, and Roy would come to Toronto and stay with him and live with him in Toronto when he performed at the Embassy Room. So they were kind of roommates, and then Roy would go back on the road. And before Roy went away on one trip, he goes, listen, there's a woman that works for you, and she's the woman for you. That's who really loves you, and that's the woman you should be with.
Now he was married to who at the time?
Nobody. He just had a girlfriend.
Okay.
But she was married.
Okay.
And she had 3 kids, and she had a really bad husband.
Uh-huh.
And so his answer was, no, that's crazy talk. She's got these 3 kids, this really bad person in her life. That makes no sense, Roy. You're crazy. She goes, no, that's the woman for you. That's who really loves you, and that's who you're going to love. So I think he planted, to your point, a seed in my grandfather's head. So then Roy goes out on tour. This is the way my grandfather told it. And during that time, my who ends up being my grandmother scratches him and goes, you don't know good people, because she was jealous of the girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And the way my grandfather told it was, he goes,
wait, you said your grandmother?
Well, it ends up being my grandmother. So maybe I'm giving away the punchline, but so he tells me, like, listen, my grandmother worked for my grandfather as a bartender.
Right. Okay.
And that's what Roy Orbison said, that's the woman for you.
Uh-huh.
My grandfather says, you're crazy. She has 3 kids and a crazy husband. And I have this girlfriend, and she's rich and she's beautiful and young. Like, you don't know what you're talking about, Roy. And Roy goes away on tour. And then while Roy is away, there's an incident where my grandmother, who ends up being my grandmother, who scratches my grandfather. And he goes, hey, I'm going to fire you. She goes, you don't know good people. Because she's jealous of the girlfriend. And he goes, then your grandmother proceeded. I said, I'm going to fire you. And she jumped me in the office, and we were together ever since. My grandmother, that was how my grandmother and my grandfather got together. And then Roy came back. He goes, see, I told you.
Uh-huh. So
Roy Orbison story.
Is your grandma still alive?
She is not. And that's why, honestly, I think that's the only reason I got to the heart of it. Because when she passed, I said to my grandfather, all right, let's talk, because he would never talk about that life. So all we saw were pictures.
So why do you think he would never talk about it?
Well, because if you look at my grandmother's history, she had 3 kids from a prior relationship and a really bad husband, who's like my natural grandfather. Because my dad was one of the 3 kids. So I think she just wanted to, they actually left Toronto and they went to a Michigan border city. Well, you might have heard of Sarnia, Ontario. It's on the Port Huron border.
What's it called?
It's called Sarnia. It's this little petroleum town across from Port Huron, Michigan.
Okay.
He took his whole life, that whole life of running the club and everything, took the 3 kids, my grandmother, and went there to escape the husband, which is my, biological grandfather.
Yeah.
He's just a terrible human being. But that's how it all started. And then you fast forward, my mother worked with my grandmother. My dad, of course, was the kid, and that's how my parents met, was at they worked at together. So I dropped it in the line. I go, thank you, Roy Orbison.
So you never met Roy?
No, I wouldn't have. He passed. Well, I would have been alive during that, but I never met him.
Yeah.
They had already escaped by that point, so I think they were apart. But so that's my Roy Orbison story.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Cool. Some legacy there.
It is. Well, all
right.
Daryl, thank you so much for spending so much time with me. I'm going to edit out the parts where the internet cut out.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're going to have a very long reel.
All right. Sounds good. Let's talk again sometime.